I realize like so much of what you know about the world depends on what you perceive. Like so much of how you understand the world around you and your place in it is based on the perspectives you have and like what you're exposed to. And I just thought like the more you're exposed to, the more like the better you'll understand the world and the better you'll understand yourself.
Alrighty, bro. For folks that don't know, Alex is my younger brother. Right now, he is the principal at Lowercarbon Capital, where he says he invests in startups to reduce climate warming greenhouse gas emissions, remove emissions already in the atmosphere, and buy the planet more time to adapt. Alex is also a Fulbright scholar. He is a Searingtown Elementary School Gemini graduate. And, you know, as some of you already may know, he's done a lot. So I, wanted to get him on this first episode to understand, maybe why you're doing some of these things, dude, how you've gotten here. But first, can you explain to us what Lowercarbon Capital is?
Yeah, honored to be here. Thanks for everyone tuning in. I don't know who's in here, but it's kind of bizarre just like looking at you and just assuming that there's people out there in the world listening. But yeah, so Lowercarbon Capital, we're an early stage venture capital fund. And for those of you who don't exactly know what venture capital is, it's essentially investing in startups. And so what my work is investing in startups that are focused on reducing climate change and mitigating climate change. And typically that work kind of falls into one of three buckets that, as Danny kind of laid out, is the first is just reducing greenhouse gases. So startups that are coming up with alternatives to the ways that we do things today that create greenhouse gases. So things like agriculture, transportation, power, buildings, manufacturing, all of that. So sometimes it's really funky stuff like nuclear fusion. We invest in things like lab grown meat, just really, really funky stuff, using renewable energy to produce cement or steel. So that's what we do mostly. That's the first bucket. The second bucket is carbon removal. So actually taking carbon that's already been emitted over the past 100, 200 years, and then just sequestering it long term or in things. And then the third bucket is, we call it buying ourselves more time. So it's things like investing in startups that are promoting climate resilience or climate adaptation. But we also fund research and fund nonprofits in the space. That's basically, yeah.
And what's your position in it? What are you doing there?
So I'm a principal, which essentially just means I'm an investor. We're a small team. For context, the fund was started by a guy named Chris Sacca, who you might know from the show Shark Tank. He's the guy that he had a few seasons on there wearing the ridiculous cowboy shirts. He was like a big tech investor, was very successful with traditional tech investing, then kind of had a very public retirement because he felt it wasn't really meaningful anymore. Started doing some stuff philanthropically and things like criminal justice reform, democracy, and climate. But in climate, he started, as he was funding things philanthropically, realized that that there was just really good, exciting opportunities to invest in startups. So I say this because we're a small team. So it's Chris. I have Chris and his wife Crystal, and then there's 3 other full-time employees. And so we're all, my role is, the title is kind of meaningless. It's just basically investor. I find companies, I source them, I talk to them, I evaluate them, we invest in them, then I try to help them as they grow.
How did you find Lowercarbon Capital? How did you apply?
Yeah, a podcast actually. There's a great podcast called My Climate Journey. It's a guy who had a startup that he sold in, I guess, running. It was like sold to Asics, the shoe company. It's like a running tracker startup, and he sold it and was like, I want to work on climate, started a podcast, started interviewing people, and it just kind of exploded into this whole climate community. So he interviews really smart people. Clay, my manager, came on the show, started talking about what they're doing with lower carbon. At the end of it said, were hiring for these positions, and I applied immediately and was fortunate to get it about a little over a year ago now.
So, hearing through a podcast where you are now, what was it that you heard that persuaded you to apply? What was it that Lowercarbon Capital was doing that was like, I need to be there from where you were? Actually, before you answer that question, where were you at the time listening? What kind of position in your life?
I was in grad school. I was going to Stanford University for the master's degree in international policy. But at the time, I really wasn't doing a whole lot of policy. There is Stanford's known for being like this hub of innovation, this test bed for startups, all of that. And it's now the case that it's also that for clean tech and climate technology. So there's this really cool ecosystem that's budding over there. It's being cultivated, in particular by a guy named Dave Danielson, who is with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates's. It's basically the same thing that I described as us as a venture capital fund investing in climate technologies, but this is with Bill Gates and all his rich friends. And so that was my professor, and I really got involved in his class, in which I was doing projects like looking at electric vehicles in Africa, or clean cement. And so at the time, I was just kind of really having fun exploring that, and actually just getting away from policy, in fact, and like exploring projects that seemed to be making tangible impacts. And so when I listened to it, it was I think what really appealed to me was that it was obvious I could explore a lot of curiosities at once, a lot of like different domains I wanted to explore without having to go too deep, and trading off time exploring others.
So, I've heard you talk about this before, of this switch from policy to maybe, as I understand, more clearly defined impact-driven endeavors, right? What you was explaining to me from your time in Indonesia, which I'd love for you to talk about. I heard you talk about being in a position of wanting to persuade policy versus being on the ground, more action-driven items. Is that the difference between maybe policy and what you're doing now, or your pursuits for policy versus your shift over into what you're doing now, right?
Yeah. So I guess the long answer is that it kind of starts with after I finished grad school, after I finished undergrad, and I went to Indonesia, and I was doing just research. We can get into what I was doing and all that, but basically, I'd come to realize like policy is the biggest lever of change, and the most important in terms of climate, but it's one that pulling that lever is very, very hard and intractable, and often it never gets pulled. And so when I was in grad school and I was working on international climate and energy policy, like one of the most intractable fields, where it's notoriously slow moving, notoriously it's known for being a space in which global leaders gather, talk a lot, don't really do all that much. And at the time, Trump was president and rolling back all these climate and energy and environmental policies. I was thinking like, questioning what I wanted to do with my life. And while that was happening, I was like, okay, I don't want to be in a position where I put my life's work into something just to get one policy passed.
Yeah.
And then someone signs it away on a piece of paper. Like all it takes is the signature of a politician to undo your life's work. And so I really didn't want to be in a position like that, just for my own sake and my own career. So at the time, I was seeing all these other people at Stanford actually building startups, doing things and making tangible impacts, irrespective of policy or other people. And so I think that's what really appealed to me, is like being able to see the tangible impacts of your decision making, every day, basically. And then that's kind of how it plays now. Like if I was still working in the policy world, I could be working day after day towards one policy goal for years at a time.
Yeah.
This, I see impacts of my decisions on a daily basis. And for my own sake, that's much more appealing.
That's important to you?
It's fulfilling. Yeah, it's motivating. I think like the most the best way to be effective is when you're motivated. So that keeps me motivated.
And your motivation comes from seeing the, I guess, the results of your work. And in this case, would it be seeing the success of some of the companies that you're investing in? What is the impact that you're creating in this space, more specifically at Lowercarbon?
Yeah, so there's two main ways. The first is just capital, honestly, just getting these companies resources to grow and to scale and to accelerate their work. So they're the geniuses that are actually building solutions and deploying them, and we are just helping them out with capital the first way, and the second way is just with any other way we can be helpful, and that's often connections, that's storytelling, that's communications, that's connecting them to policymakers, helping them navigate the policy space. And so basically the way that I see the impact that we have is by catalyzing the growth of these startups, so they can do what they do best, which is reducing climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
What's your impact, though? And you said our impact. What is yours in Lowercarbon? How do you know when you've done something that has led to that catalyst? Or how do you know when you've become that catalyst yourself?
Yeah. When I am the link between our resources and the companies that we give the resources to. So I see that link. I sometimes I am that link. I'm the guy that brings them in, and then we're able to create a relationship, and then we help them with resources and our expertise and our connections, and then they can grow. And so being that kind of link between them is pretty exciting.
How's that feel, dude?
I mean, it's like the fucking best job in the world, in my opinion. It's like I get this. Quite frankly, it's spending other people's money on other people's ideas. Like day in and day out, I just talk to really smart people building solutions to I think the most meaningful problem of our lifetimes, and I have to decide whether or not to help them grow. And that's what I mean by that's a clear decision that has tangible impacts.
Yeah. Because we've mentioned it a little bit. Do you mind explaining what you did in Indonesia?
Yeah. So I can basically, it kind of all starts with Anthony Bourdain. I was a huge Anthony Bourdain fan in high school, and he really kind of romanticizes Southeast Asia. And I was pretty captivated by it, and knew that when I graduated undergrad, I wanted to go out and travel and backpack and see the world and all that good stuff. And figured I'd learned about Fulbright as kind of like a way to do it and get a nice line on the resume.
Mind just explaining what Fulbright is?
Yeah, so Fulbright is a scholarship that is put on by the U.S. government, specifically the U.S. Department of State, and it's basically somewhat like an exchange program. Like essentially, they send American students and scholars to various parts of the world, different countries, and then those countries send students to the U.S. often to go to universities and then return home to their countries. It's more or less like an exchange, but a lot of it's research, a lot of it's even teaching. And so I did a research scholarship, and I picked Indonesia. I had a very different, to be honest, it's because I wanted to go see the country and enjoy living on a beautiful tropical island and scuba diving and surfing and stuff. And I kind of worked backwards towards being the person I knew they wanted to see on an applicant, in an application. So I did that. I was fortunate to get it. And Indonesia just, in retrospect, it made a ton of sense from a environmental and climate perspective. But mainly it was just because I wanted to travel there, and Indonesia had some pretty favorable application statistics.
Just back up and say why Indonesia, because I know you've spoken to me about the diverse ecology there, the why it is that you can do the type of climate work there.
Yeah, so what I was saying is like the real answer was because I wanted to travel there. I thought it was a
Yeah.
beautiful country, and like, but in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense because it's one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, mainly because of deforestation. They have one of the richest forests in the forest ecosystems, rainforest ecosystems in the world, but they're deforesting swaths of it because they have, a massive population. They're a developing country, and they grow a lot of palm oil, which is a hugely prevalent and widely used commodity. It's in most things we use every day, even if you don't know it. It's in your toothpaste, it's in your cookies, it's in your Nutella, all that. So the result of that is they often deforest this super rich rainforest. They burn it, it releases a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, and because of that, they're one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. But what I was studying was actually food and water security at the time, as it relates to climate change. So I went to an island called Lombok, this little tiny island next
Shout
to
out to
Bali.
Lombok.
Shout out to Lombok. And the what was happening is it's a volcanic island with a volcano in the middle, and there's rainforest on the volcano, and then there's rivers that run down from the volcano and feed the islanders water. It's how all the islanders, the 3 million people that live on the island, that's how they survive, because they grow rice on the island, and they need water from the rivers. And so what was happening when I got there to do research on this kind of system and seeing how these people might adapt in a changing climate, I realized it was less to do about climate change and more to do about energy. They were chopping down the forest on the volcano to use fuel as fuel, basically, to cook, to bathe, just to have fuel.
Like
And
charcoal,
so
you're saying?
Yeah, so you exactly, you chop down the wood, you burn it, and you have a source of energy. But when you chop down forest, rivers they don't retain as well. Like the land doesn't retain the rivers as well. And so in the rainy season, they would get floods, and in the dry season, they would get droughts. And so I realized, like, they had access to energy. Um, they would be more resilient to a changing climate. They would have more water. And so that's what kind of convinced me to go into energy, and that's kind of started the path from Indonesia to where I am, basically.
And through Fulbright, what did you have to produce?
So it was a research. There's nothing really, basically. There's no like deliverable at the end. Most people do research for like a graduate degree. I got like a paper or two published, but not all that much. Yeah, I did publish some research, but it wasn't like anything. It's part of it is just like the cultural exchange.
And how much of that experience informed your decision to move from policy to, I guess, what I'm considering, action-oriented items, this investing?
Yeah, quite a bit, because I was just like, I was doing academic research, and it just all struck me as like a lot of people often just talking about a whole lot of nothing and not really doing anything. And so that was like the first inkling in which I was like, I don't like, policy is maybe not fulfilling for like, maybe it's not going to motivate me to. I mean, I went and did a degree in policy, but that was mainly just because I wanted to go to Stanford, and I figured that was the program I could get into. Yeah, that's part of the reason I was like, while at Stanford, so I guess so inspired by the people actually doing work, like having action, taking action, and seeing impacts.
When you say that, is there a certain project that you have in mind that you're calling back to? When you say that you were inspired while you were at Stanford, is there something that comes to mind?
Yeah, in particular, there's one that it came full circle this week. So I worked on a project at Stanford on clean cement. And so for context, cement is like one of the largest challenges we have in terms of solving climate change. It's the most it's the most abundant man-made material in the world. If it was its own country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas after China and US. And it's because it's just a very energy intensive process to produce cement. You can think of it almost as like melting rocks. Like you have to turn rocks into liquids, and then so you can shape them, and it's very energy intensive. And the actual process actually just naturally releases CO2. So cement's not going anywhere. In fact, it's only going to grow as like the rest of the world it gets richer, population growth continues. And so we got to figure out how to make it in a way that's sustainable and clean and not releasing quite a bit of emissions. So I got paired up with a team actually over at MIT, who it's this brilliant postdoc and her professor, who together they're material scientists, and they found out they looked at electricity, and they're like, okay, it's super cheap. Let's see if we can use this super cheap clean electricity, renewable electricity, to replace the energy inputs in the cement making process. So they figured out an electrochemical way, meaning like it's a chemical process powered by electricity, in which the output is the same. It's cement. And so what that opportunity is that you can power cement production with clean electricity, which today it's powered by fossil fuels, not even electricity, just you burn fossil fuels. And so they figured out this way of making clean cement, and it was, I thought, very, very promising, very exciting. And in fact, after I left, the project I did with them was like helping them look at the market, helping them look at various policies, various geographies where they could use the cement. But it ended up turning into a company called Sublime Systems, and just this past week, Lowercarbon invested in them.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd
so it
that
was
feel,
cool
man?
for it to come. It was just really cool because it was like my first real step into this space of like entrepreneurship and investing in clean tech. And same for the CEO, Leah, the scientist. And I wrote her, and I'm just really excited that this kind of came full circle. And she was like, yeah, it was my first step too, and I'm glad we're kind of taking the journey together. So keep an eye out for them. You'll see. I mean, you see like Bill Gates talking about cement all the time for these same reasons. So I think keep an eye out for a company called Sublime Systems.
Sublime Systems.
It'll be exciting.
Look out. When I hear about all this, man, I understand climate change to be this immensely wicked problem, and I say that as something that is going to be, as I can maybe hear what you're saying is like everything that we're doing is a step towards solving it, right? And that you can exist in your lifetime and it still not be, quote, solved, right? I'm so curious, man, what you feel your impact in it is. What do you feel that you're doing personally to mitigate climate change?
In some sense, it's just kind of like arithmetic. It's just kind of numbers. Like, climate change is caused by the amount of greenhouse gases in the air. And greenhouse gases, they trap heat. The sun rays come in, greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere, and they'll trap heat and heat the planet. And that's what global warming is. And so the more greenhouse gases there are in the atmosphere, the hotter it's going to get. And so it's just basically a arithmetic of reducing the amount of greenhouse gas in the air. It's like, this is the number we emit are adding every year. This is the number that gets naturally, that we lose naturally every year. And so we got to get that number down to basically zero so that we have a stable level of greenhouse gas in the air. And in that sense, like every ton of greenhouse gases emitted matters. And so the question is like, what do I feel like I'm doing? So if I'm helping these companies grow and they're the ones actually directly reducing or removing emissions, and that's how I see the impact. It's like we're helping these guys actually make direct cuts at the level of greenhouse gas in the air. So it's basically that, because you can hear a lot about, I don't know what it means to like people outside of the space, but you hear a lot about 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius is like the international community's goal of like limiting climate change to only not going above 2 degrees Celsius,
Yeah.
meaning 2 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels, like the average global average temperatures. And so every fraction of every degree, it's not like if we hit 2, it will go above 2, we're fucked, and if we're at 1.5, we're like less fucked. It's not like black and white, you know. It's every degree, fraction of a degree within that span matters for people's lives. And so every ton matters towards that. It's not like if we're going to overshoot 2, then like why bother? We're just it's just gonna, basically every fraction of a degree matters. So that's how I see our impact of reducing the levels.
So, now it's dawning on me. Maybe it would be helpful if we could almost go into, like, I guess what I'm understanding is like a climate change 101. Like, there's a lot of words and phrases and ideas that are, I feel like, often shared, and it took me a while to understand some of them, and I still, even hearing you share some of them, I don't feel like I quite know. So do you mind answering a few of these, like, 101 questions? So what are fossil fuels?
Fossil fuels are chemically they're called hydrocarbons. So it's a chain of hydrogen and carbon. It's just molecules. Fossil fuels are actually their source of energy, and basically they come from organic matter that hundreds of thousands of years ago. So think like all the forests and all the dinosaurs and all the living organisms on planet Earth that died and then went into the soil, and then just over millions of years just compacted, and eventually they just turned into like goop, like
nice.
with hydrogen goop and carbon in it. And so it's just energy dense goop. And so fossil fuels are we pull them up from the earth and then burn them, and we get energy. They have a lot of energy contained within them, and so when you burn them, you get a lot of energy out, and it's why.
What do you mean by what? Sorry, let me just interrupt. Let me say, like, when you're saying burning them, how do I take dinosaur goop, burn it, and then turn it into energy? How is that transition?
It's usually, and now this is odd. This is what it's funny because a lot of people don't actually think about this, but mostly it's by creating steam. And so you think of like a turbine that will spin, and that spinning creates electricity, like it creates an electric current. But to get it to spin, often it's steam. The steam will move it, spin the turbine, and you get that steam by burning fossil fuels and getting water to super high temperatures. You burn fossil fuels to heat water, to make steam, to spin a turbine, to create electricity. Or in other cases, you just burn fossil fuels just for heat. Or in a car, it's like you're combusting oil or gasoline, and it's spinning a piston and it's making motion. So basically, it's just motion. It's like you burn the energy density for motion.
And why are we using fossil fuels to do this over some of the other things that you can burn? That I understand, like charcoal or like you said, electrify this stuff. Why was it that for so long we were using fossil fuels to heat the steam?
They're just the most energy dense. They're compact. They're easy to move. They're easy to store. Like you just can dig up some coal from underground, and you have a source of energy that you can, move around with you, put it in a truck, take it wherever you want, burn it whenever you want to. So it's just super convenient, very convenient. And like, it's the reason, and they're just very energy dense. And they're the reason we've, I think my headphones are dying.
Essentially, fossil fuels are the reason we have the society we have today. We're able to industrialize and build cities and build societies.
So fossil fuels. I understand them now as prehistoric goop that we use that are energy rich, that we've used to burn because they're easy to move. They're you said maybe more rich than other things.
That's like the main thing, and it's convenient and it's energy dense,
and just ruins the atmosphere. So why are they called greenhouse gases? What is the greenhouse effect that makes them greenhouse gases?
So as I was kind of alluded to earlier, a greenhouse works in that you grow plants in a greenhouse because the material you made the greenhouse can allow certain wavelengths of light to come in but not come out, and so they're trapped in the house, and that the effect of that is that it makes the greenhouse warmer. So greenhouses for that reason allow you to grow things in colder climates. Like if you wanted to grow citrus fruits that grow in warmer climates, you can do that in colder places with a greenhouse because you can retain the heat. So the reason they're called greenhouse gases is because a similar effect in that the gases are in the atmosphere, and normally we get rays of the sun come into the atmosphere and then bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
But like they hit the surface of the earth and bounce back. But if you have more and more greenhouses, more greenhouse gases, these gases prevent that bouncing back. So the heat, the sun's rays come in
Mm-hmm.
and then they stay there
Mm-hmm.
and end up just heating the surface of the earth rather than reflecting back out into space.
Mm-hmm.
So similar way in a greenhouse retains the heat, an atmosphere with greenhouse gases will retain the heat.
So what I understand you shared is that the gases work as a natural greenhouse around the earth. The sun's heat comes in through the greenhouse glass, hits the earth, bounces back off the earth, right?
Yeah.
And then is trapped within there because of those gases.
Think of it like our atmosphere is thicker.
Okay.
And so there's like
glass is
more
thicker.
things like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's less likely that the sun will reflect back. And to be clear, like we wouldn't live on the planet without greenhouse gases. Like we
Mhm.
wouldn't have a stable atmosphere that is conducive to life without greenhouse gases. It's just a very fine balance. Like it's very sensitive balance. And so if you overthrow that balance with excess greenhouse gas, it's just going to get hotter and it's going to change the climate that we have.
And then I understand that without it, the planet would freeze, right? Because the heat wouldn't be maintained.
We wouldn't be able to retain enough heat. Yeah.
Okay. So now once again, greenhouse gas effect is essentially these gases are working as this greenhouse over the earth in which is trapping the heat. With more emissions, that glass is getting, I guess, metaphorically thicker, increasing the heat, and then keep warming the earth as more emissions are pumped in. Okay.
Yeah.
And now you're saying, this might be an obvious question, but you're saying that you said before that each degree or any movement towards higher degrees matters to us, matters to the earth. Why does it matter? What is it that is happening?
Yeah. So the first and foremost is warming, and so that's why we call global warming. But climate systems are very complex, and so if you're wondering why you used to hear global warming and now you hear climate change, is because climate change better encapsulates like the myriad ways in which warming will change the climate. And so in some places it'll get colder, in some places it'll get warmer, in some places there'll be more rain, in some places there'll be less rain. Basically, what you have to know is climate's just going to get fucked up. It's like it's going to be destabilized.
Yeah.
We had a stable climate for centuries, and that's what we know. And now it's changing, it's unstable. And then instability causes a lot of different factors. And it depends on where you are in the world. But some places will have a higher likelihood of natural disasters. Some places will have a higher, but by that I mean like more frequent hurricanes, stronger hurricanes. And that's like things like if the water is warmer, hurricanes are stronger. Other places are going to have more drought. Other places are going to have more flooding. Those are the main mechanisms, really. The other way is that it threatens ecosystems. Like ecosystems can collapse because they can't adapt to the changing temperatures in time. Obviously, ecosystems are built around certain climates. So think like a tropical climate. You have tropical flora and fauna, plant and animal life that are used to living in this climate, that are adapted to this climate. But when you change that climate rapidly, then they can't adapt, and the ecosystems will fall apart. So think like trees. Trees move. In fact, one tree stays the same, but like a forest will gradually move as it grows, as it expands. and it does so based on the climate around it. But if we change the temperature too quickly, they're not going to be able to move and adapt quickly enough, and we'll just risk falling apart. And so that has implications for agriculture, as does the drought. And so every degree in that sense, that's what I mean. Every degree matters, is because like the severity of this thing is not like, it's not like on or off. It's like it's a gradual thing.
Why is this important to you?
So the simple answer is that I think climate change is the multiplier of all problems. So the short answer is like, I wanted to have a career that I felt was impactful, that I feel like I could do work that was meaningful and make a difference and help people. And I quickly realized, well, I realized in college that climate change was like the one challenge that made all other challenges worse. And so I was in undergrad and I was looking at all these different challenges that, conflict, war, development, and climate was the one that was linked to all of them. It's like, if you care about war, if you care about migration, if you care about food and water security, if you care about it's anything really, it will make it worse. So that's the short answer, really. It's just that it's a multiplier of challenges and accelerant.
Can you explain to me how you went from, Madrid Kid 818 to Lower Carbon's principal, right? And for those who don't know, Madrid Kid 818 was Alex's screen name. And I shouted out specifically because I think it was, I think it was part of your identity, right? It was being born in Getafe in Spain was part of your identity. And, as for folks who don't know, my screen name was Soccer Playa with an A, 9316. It says, understand what that means. But I bring it up now because I understood you at that age as being very aware of your, I guess, global upbringing, right? Like having, our father be from Spain and our mother being from the U.S. and Irish American. We and you seem to have a certain identity about being from the world, right? Or being from Spain or being from whatever you identified, right? So once again, the question was, how did you move from Madrid Kid to, Alex Laplaza principal, Lower Carbon Capital?
It kind of starts with that like global outlook. I think, I did some reflecting on this, I guess, after like last year or 2 years ago, and like how I ended up where I was. And I think it starts with the fact that, so like you said, I was born in Spain and grew up in New York. And it was weird growing up because we had like a bit of we're in this like little weird in between, in that in New York, everyone is like excited and proud to be some kind of other nationality. We grew up in a school with a lot of proud Italian Americans, Greek Americans, Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Indian Americans, and they were all very proud of their cultures. And yet we were like the only Spanish. So I was proud of that. We were pretty proud of that. And we had close roots in Spain because we had spent so much time there growing up and spent the summers there. But when we would go to Spain, everyone in Spain was like, we were going to a part of Spain in which there was a lot of anti-Spanish sentiment because it was the Basque Country and there's this whole long history and social political context there. But we'd go to Spain and they were very much like, no, we're not Spanish, we're Basque, we're from Navarra. And it was always weird navigating that until I got old enough and kind of got to high school, and that became my identity, is like that, the mix between the two. I just became mature enough to recognize like that, it's complex, and I kind of, it just became my identity. It's like that in between, like having grown up between the US and Spain. And and not having to choose one. Like there's no need
Hmm.
to like be one or the other, or and so that I think gave me a more international outlook. And I we began traveling more,
Hmm.
particularly when we were younger. Like we had the privilege of traveling with our parents, and like I realized that so much. I started thinking in high school, and this is the time when I was reading things like Gandhi and All Quiet on the Western Front, and getting real
Watching Bourdain
real
religiously.
idealistic. And
Yeah.
yeah. I realized like so much of what you know about the world depends on what you perceive. Like so much of how you understand the world around you and your place in it is based on the perspectives you have and like what you're exposed to. And I just thought like the more you're exposed to, the more like the better you'll understand the world and the better you'll understand yourself. And so I really began seeking out these international experiences, and that's what led me to study international relations as an undergrad. And
Well, so
so
hold on, slow down. So you're having these thoughts in middle school, in high school?
yeah, both. Both. Mostly high school is like when it's interesting. In high school you can very much uh like deliberately craft your identity
Yeah.
conscientiously. In some ways you can't, but like often like high schoolers are making decisions about themselves and who they want to be very deliberately, conscientiously. And my decision was to be like to to be a guy about travel, to be a
Hmm.
guy about the world, like that's what I wanted to be, and that's who I wanted my identity to be.
Why was that important to
Yeah,
you?
like just like I said, like like I think about Plato's allegory of the cave, and in which the people in the cave, like their reality and what they think is true
Yeah.
and real is what they see on the cave
Yeah.
wall,
Yeah.
because that's all they know and that's all they've seen. But obviously the world is much bigger, and I thought that was a really apt metaphor for like the world and going out and seeing it, and like it just made me want to experience other places and cultures and contexts.
Yeah, dude.
And I also just felt like it was a way to get out of your comfort zone. I was like, we grew up in the suburbs of Long Island, and I was just like ready to try new things and get out of my comfort zone and learn who I was in doing so.
Yeah, dude. That's something that I was always so impressed by you, my whole life is how action oriented you are. How it was, I have this desire to go to Indonesia. Let me reverse engineer this so I can position myself in the best way to do that, right? It was like, what are the actions that I need to take in order to get to that place, right? And I say that as someone who oftentimes gets, I feel stuck in that ideation, right? That like, oh, that's a great idea. What is that going to look like? What is that going to be? And I see you very much as someone that's, okay, what is that thing? What are the actions that I need to take in order to get me in that place, right? Not necessarily maybe like in a place that's exactly as you imagined it, but just towards that direction. And I saw that too, taking actions like boldly sometimes too. And what comes to mind, and I'm sorry to maybe bring this up if my mom is watching, but that time that you were in a layover in Egypt for a few hours and decided that I'm going to leave the airport, grab a tour guide to go to the pyramids and check that out before my next flight. And I say apologies to my mother because that was in secret. That was something that, Alex had done without, let's just say my mother cleaned the house for 7 hours straight, didn't say anything. And I'll let you take it from there. But like, I bring that up as like actions, right? You're like, I'm going to go do this thing. And you had done it, right? And then, of course,
Yeah,
the
that was
story
a
goes.
really, I'm sorry, mom. Not, I don't know if you're listening, but I'm sorry. Well, yeah, they very much told me.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I had a 10-hour layover in Cairo, and they're very much like, don't fucking leave the airport. Like, don't even think about it. It's not safe for you to do it on your own. I was like, all right, sure. I got to Cairo. The airline sent us to a hotel because it was such a long layover. So I already left the airport just because I had to. And then I was like, all right, gotta do it. I gotta go see the pyramids. Like I got the time. It was super sketchy, super sketchy. Yeah, the story is I took a cab to like a camel tour, some random camel tour, and I paid with my card, and so they, I guess, our at that time our bank accounts were linked, and so they got a notification of like a card transaction in Cairo.
Outside of the airport. Yeah.
Yeah, outside of the airport, and then couldn't get in touch with me
Yeah.
to make sure, like, see what was up, and so they were furious, and rightly so. It was a fuck up on my part. It was very selfish. I mean, I think it's generous to call it action oriented. It's probably more suitable to call it selfish and it's just self-centered. But dude, I was in Egypt. I want to see the pyramids.
Well, I mean, I bring it up for that point exactly, man. Like it didn't matter what you thought about it or what others thought about it. You just acted, right? And like,
Yeah.
you know, what I'm
probably use thought.
what I'm starting to understand, and as I get older, is that we can't control the outcome of our actions. We can only control our actions, right? So like here, you can just choose to go, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen on our parents' end, right? And I know, as you say, and I maybe agree with you here that there's certain things to be considered here, but I don't bring it up to shame you. I bring it up to really emphasize that with barring all thoughts, you acted, right? And that has gotten you, I think, certain success in life, man, that I'm always very impressed by. Because it was, I heard of a job on a podcast. I'm going to apply, right? Mm-hmm. I see this opportunity in Indonesia. I'm going to apply for one of the most prestigious American scholarships. I'm going to figure out the best way to do it, right? Not like, am I qualified? What is the things that I need, right? Like, you're like, okay, what are the actions I need to take in order to be in Lombok? And you were there, man. Like, we were there, hanging out in your crib in Lombok, and it was, with your bum gun and your ants by your stove, and and like you put yourself in these places, man. It's not like accidental, right? And like what I was really impressed by is like how once you were there, like, man, I'm gonna continue acting, right? I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna do things here in Lombok. I'm gonna scuba dive. I'm gonna go to these places. I'm gonna see these tribes, and like you really are rounding your perspectives.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's kind of you. I think personally, I think a lot of times achieving outcomes you want is just a matter of like being there, showing up,
Mm-hmm.
Just putting yourself in the right place and then seeing what comes of it. Because it's like, the surest way to not achieve things is if you never try.
Yeah.
So
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Michael Scott.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I never really asked you, man. Do you feel confident? Do you feel confident in acting?
Oh, yeah. I think confident is like not the completely right word. It's more like I'm more comfortable with risk. I think it's less about confidence and like that I'm sure an action I take will pay out.
Okay.
It's more that I think there's often not that much to lose.
There's not that much to lose.
The cost of the action is very low. There's like people don't take actions because they fear the downside. But I'm pretty comfortable with risk, and I recognize a lot of that is just privilege and like having the comforts we grew up with.
Yeah.
Like by contrast, like my girlfriend, is she works really hard for everything she's earned, and has worked really hard for everything she's earned, and so there's a lot for her to lose. Whereas like I'm more comfortable taking risks because I feel like I haven't had to relative to others like as much suffering.
What is confidence then? How do you define it? if not that?
Yeah, but I don't know. You don't think that's different? Like, I think confidence is just assurance in your outcomes and your decisions. Whereas, like, I'm not sure
Yeah.
of my decisions, but like, I think what's the worst that can happen if I take them?
I think that
You know,
second
like,
one, I think what you don't think is confident is what confidence is. Confidence, I understand to be acting regardless of what's happened, right? And how does one gain confidence? It's through acting despite whatever's going to happen, right? You know, I've been thinking about a lot of this recently because it's like, how does one gain confidence, right? And I feel like a lot of the assumption is to prepare, right? I'm going to, how do you feel more confident taking a test, right? If I prepare, study a lot, right, then I do well, right? Let's just say there's that scenario, right? Are you confident because you prepared? I would say the opposite, right? I think confidence is when you show up to the test without studying and you do well, right? It's that, like, I've succeeded in a place where I didn't imagine to. So the next time I encounter that situation, I know that I will be okay despite whatever happens, right? In fact, maybe that preparation could be a crutch because you're understanding that I can only do well because I prepared, right? You're not confident, you're reliant on your preparation, right? Because the situation is let's just say for taking this test, right? The situation is you study, you do take the test, you do well. You study, you take the test, you do badly. You don't study, you take the test, you don't do well. You study, you don't take the test, right? And I'm saying all of these important for a reason, right? I'm saying in that, like, it's really those last two, right? That last one in particular where you don't study and you do well, or you don't study and you don't do well, right?
and you're losing me.
Well, I'm saying in the sense that, like, confidence doesn't come from that preparation. I think confidence comes in what you're talking about here, right? Is that, like, understanding that there's a risk to be taken, right? But despite that, I'm going to act, right? Because in the end, I will make it through. I'll survive in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I bring this up because now what I see in these things is that, like, you're preparing, I think, respectively, but it's not going to prevent you from acting, right? Like, that I can go, maybe it's unfortunate, but, like, you go, and even when you take a cab outside of Cairo and you're not supposed to in a country you don't know, right? And with much caution to tell you not to do it, you're still here. I'm still talking to you right now, right? You've survived that, right? And you have more confidence in entering these unknown spaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I bring that.
I just meant more like I heard about my job on a podcast and I applied because, like, what's the cost of doing so? The hour put into
Shame.
that
You could be,
position.
you could do something like that and get denied and feel as if you're not good enough. Like, your hard work for applying, people feel that way, dude.
Yeah, it's true.
It's this thing where people, that's why people don't act, right? Is because they're
Yeah.
scared of that outcome, right? They're not confident in acting because they feel as if they're not prepared or whatever it is. But the thing is going to go as it goes, right? Because as I said earlier, like, you can't control the outcomes of your actions. You control your actions, right? So act and then do your best to deal with the feelings that follow, right? Not necessarily worry about them ahead of time, right? And that is that confidence. Like, take this conversation, man. Like, I don't know how it's going to go. I started the whole thing and the first 5 minutes were muted, right? Like, let's be real. But the thing is, like, I felt confident in this because I know that regardless of how this happens, what happens in this conversation, I'm going to be okay, right? And that's mostly, and shout out to everyone that's been supporting me and doing this, right? And that's where that confidence is gained, right? Because regardless of what happens in the end, it's going to be supported, right? So that's why I asked you in this, because I think you are. By that standard, do you think you're confident?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, everyone has their, insecurities and their self-doubts.
Yeah, but let's not talk about everyone. That's we're talking about you, man.
Yeah, but I mean that in that, like, it's a normal, natural human thing, and no one's immune to that, including myself. Yeah, I suppose so. Honestly, yeah, like, I guess you call it confidence, but honestly, a lot of it is just like privilege and been given, like, recognizing that we've been given wonderful opportunities by our parents, um and trying to make the most of them.
Do you think you have to be successful because you were privileged? How do you feel about that? I not think. Like, well, how do you feel about that? Like, what success means because we were given a platform, an opportunity.
I think I owe it to, I mean, not just our parents, almost just like the, in a more cosmic sense, like the world. Like I feel like it's just to society almost that I if I don't make the most of everything, the incredible opportunities I've been given, it's just like a waste for myself, for
Oh,
other people in my
waste.
life.
That's a heavy word, man.
Not a waste, but like, you know, it's a shame. I think it would be a shame if I didn't make the most of the opportunities I was given. Yeah.
And who determines that?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Myself. It's very much internal. It's like it's not like something that lingers every day and like is on my mind every day, but obviously it's like I think not everyone has this equal opportunities. Not everyone has the same opportunities we've been given. Most people, in fact, we've been quite lucky with the lives that we've led and we were born into. And I think I think it would be pretty shitty of me to not to recognize that and make the most of it.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's why I ask you about it, because it's to use a word that I maybe not too confident is the word, but it's to say that like it can be a burden, right? It can be an idea that like you're expected to act because you were given this opportunity.
Yeah.
And this kind of suffering, this kind of burden, man, is not, you know, is often gate kept, right? Like you hear people like, you know, they have celebrity, they have a lot of opportunity, a lot of privilege. How could they have been sad, or how could it's like?
I think though the same to the conversation we were just having though. It's like I don't view it as a burden. I view it as like if I fail, I'll still be better off than many other people in the world, and like I should just be grateful for that. You know, so it's less like feeling like it's a burden and more just gratitude and relief, if anything. And that same feeling I've had the opportunities to take risks and having the safety and the comfort and the privilege to do so. I feel more gratitude than anything. And that's I guess why I am less, you know, averse to risk. Like more, I embrace risk more.
Yeah. So I'd question now, because I'm speaking to a few people that were interested, of maybe if you could walk me through slightly how you made a decision to go into climate, right? Like I know you said that you saw it's, I understand is the you know issue that touches all other issues. And before that it was, you know, policy, wanting to make impact and change, have output. Why is it that you went, you know, is it from, I guess what I'm trying to understand is like bridge me from high school to American University foreign policy.
From high school to yeah. I mean, like I was saying earlier, sorry, my roommate wants to cook in the living room, kitchen. Yeah, I mean, I told you in high school, like I was very much being more inclined to travel and explore the world and other countries and other cultures. I think just naturally led me to study international relations. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it, but I knew I wanted to do something international, and that seemed like the most obvious path. But it also allowed me to explore a few different domains and a few different disciplines within that broad umbrella of just like international, basically. It's just what it is, essentially. Like international relations just means that it's international. And so I got to undergrad and I was exploring a few different things. I was pretty confident I wanted to do like diplomacy and go be a diplomat and be in foreign service, be in the State Department. But realized I didn't actually want to do that. There was things that appealed to me about it, but that probably wasn't the right fit. And so I explored other things like peace and conflict, basically like armed conflict and war and international security. I explored foreign policy, as I said, and then international development. And international development appealed to me because I just felt it was just intellectually, it was fascinating. The ways in which different societies develop and grow based on various different characteristics and geographies and cultures, and that all fascinated me, is like how there could be such different walks of life all around the world, and the kind of roots of that. And so that led me to Uganda, because I was studying international development. I was living with Tyler Steinhardt, and he was working with a nonprofit in Uganda that stood up a school. They had a primary school in like super rural, remote Uganda, and he was basically like, "Do you want to go and teach soccer at this school for a summer?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah, yeah, of course I'll go."
Absolutely,
Like,
yo.
see you, yeah, see work for the nonprofit, see the part of the world that I'd never been to, um, and just kind of challenge myself. And certainly I did that, but got to Uganda, and that's where I think Uganda is what convinced me to go into climate, because I could already see very, very intimately how, yeah, you could see how reliant whole societies are on rain falling from the sky, the
Yeah.
ground being able to produce plants. Even from the base of the school I worked in, like they installed a water pump at the school, and it was like miraculous. It was, more students came to school
Oh,
because they
wow.
could get water there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like student attendance increased, and like that's where I really started seeing the linkages between everything, seeing how closely interconnected it was, and like how the environment was just kind of was linked to everything that I was kind of curious about. And it was the one like common thread that I could touch on all these things. Um, yeah, so I mean, so for that reason, that's why I did food and water security in Indonesia, is because I was my experience in Uganda, um, and and then that's what led me to energy, and then that's
Yeah.
what led me to the lower carbon.
I think those are the chains that I always find so fascinating, man. It's honestly, I think, the foundation of why I want to have these conversations, because one thing leads to another, right? And it's like, what are the actions that moved you between these, and the decisions that you had to make at the time, the person that you were? Because I can see here that the person that you are now is not the same person that, of course, was making those decisions at a younger age, right? And it was, what I see here is, ideas about what you want to do led you to American, just living with Tyler, right? Like being in the same room with someone who also has, interests in your, circles, right? An opportunity for you, right? Which led you to see this stuff at the school, which led you to get a new perspective about this, which led you, it's like, even once again, like the sheer, like, I think, like how amazing it is that like you found your current job on a podcast, dude. Like it's like you don't know the thing that you're going to listen to, the thing that someone's going to say, the offering that's going to happen, that's going to
That's
these
fine. Like,
things.
you just got to show up sometimes. You just got to be there. You just got to take the actions and see what comes of it, because like there's so much more to gain than there is to lose, almost in every situation.
Yeah. And that's what I see from you, man. I think, had some conversations about this, is you have this ability to go into a room and understand like how to almost identify the opportunity there, and then like capitalize on it, like be there, right? It's like I'm gonna position myself, like it's deliberate, right? You're gonna go in, read it, and then understand how it can help you. What do you agree with me?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think of myself as like that transactional, but I guess yeah, it's probably a good thing. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, what's cool is like, and something I've been thinking about lately is, so my job is in my day to day, like I am looking at so many different ideas and solutions and sectors and technologies, and like my job is to pretty much just pick out good ideas
Yeah.
out of a bunch, and it's really cool. But so a lot of what informs what I think is a good idea is just my past experiences and my past perspectives. So it's really cool when it comes like it comes things that I can draw a clear line from experiences in my past, and different learning experiences that at the time were just because of following a curiosity, and learning from it, and then informing decisions I make today in my current job. So some examples are like, like the Uganda experience. We invested in a company that does clean cooking fuel. And so for context, um, yeah, around like 40% of the world, still 3 billion people in the world don't have access to clean cooking fuel. That's something most people in the US think about, but it's things like actually just sitting on an open fire and breathing in
Yeah.
all the shit that comes out of dirt, out of coal, out of charcoal, out of wood. People, burn fires in their homes in many parts of the world, and they breathe that in and day out. And the result is it kills hundreds of millions of people a year. Like more deaths from indoor air pollution from dirty cooking kills more people than like HIV, tuberculosis, malaria combined every year. And so we invest in a company that is providing access to clean cooking. And I don't think I would have been as inclined to pursue that idea and really explore that opportunity had I not seen that firsthand, seen people affected by it firsthand.
Yeah.
And there's just other cool things that come up, like in college, my capstone, like my thesis was basically on lab grown meat.
Oh yeah.
And like, it was just this at the time, it was just like this scientific idea. It was like this one lab in the Netherlands looking at like how to culture, I guess for people listening who haven't ever heard of lab grown meat, it's basically taking animal cells, like take say beef, taking a cow cells and growing them in petri dishes and feeding them the right mix of nutrients so that those cells multiply and grow. And eventually they grow enough that you can collect them and they create muscle fibers, they create fats, and they create meat. They create meat and you can grow meat. And so if you can get the cost down low enough, you can just grow meat without having to grow a cow and kill it. And so I thought that was a really fascinating idea, given how damaging meat is for the climate and for the planet. And so I just explored it. And now when I joined Lowercarbon, at the time, our biggest investment was in the company that lab work turned into. And so I was just exploring it because I thought it was cool. And now I'm like in a job in which I'm supporting that company directly just by chance. So I think the lesson I pull from that is just explore curiosities because you learn from them and then they can form decisions down the road.
Yeah, you don't know. I think it's really amazing too that the cement, like electrifying the cement, came back into your life, right? And came back in your circle in the way it did. I'm curious also if you can share maybe some other funky or out there ideas that Lowercarbon is investing in. Anything that stands out in particular?
Yeah. So we have we have lab grown meat investments. We have one investment in it's called cultured. Culturing means to multiply cells. So the term is cultured beef. We have investment in cultured beef, cultured pork, cultured coffee. So growing coffees, like having yeast ferment the coffee compounds. Cultured cheese. The same way as like you're growing cheese, you're growing milk proteins, and then you can just turn them into cheese. And cultured cooking oil, like frying oil. So we alluded to it earlier, but like the reason Indonesia deforests the rainforest is to grow oil.
Palm oil, yeah.
So if you can just grow oil from cells, you don't need to use land. That's some funky stuff. We have nuclear fusion. A lot of it's leveraging that renewable energy. It's just gotten to be some of the cheapest energy in the world. In many parts of the world, it's just wins on price because it's free when it comes from the sky or from the wind. And so using renewable energy to replace processes that would otherwise use fossil fuels. So like creating cement, like I said, but also creating steel, creating fertilizer. The fertilizer one is interesting. It's actually like a really big source of greenhouse gas emissions because it essentially through a natural chemical process, once you put fertilizer in a field, it goes into the air and then reacts with compounds in the air and turns it to a greenhouse gas. So this one's really cool. This one's funky. The reason you need fertilizer is because plants need nitrogen to grow. And normally plants get nitrogen from the atmosphere, but often it's not enough. So you just add nitrogen, and that's how you fertilize a plant. And so plants naturally take nitrogen from the atmosphere, but like I said, it's not enough. So one company we invested in taking the microbes, the microbes that are living on the plant and are responsible for taking the nitrogen from the atmosphere and feeding it to the plant. They take those same microbes and then they essentially electrify them. Like they put them in a reactor and then they pass electricity through it and supercharge them. And what it does is it makes them store energy in their cell bodies, in the microbe cells, so that they have more energy. The microbes can live longer and fix more nitrogen. And so basically you're just taking the natural process and supercharging it.
Hyping it up, gassing it up. Yeah.
And so you just spray those microbes back on the plant and they'll do it naturally. And it eliminates the need for nitrogen. You're just taking the natural process of kind of supercharging it. So
Dude,
funky stuff like that.
This stuff is
another one. I got no.
Okay, yeah.
I think this one's. I want to mention this one. These guys, they're called Running Tide. It's this fifth generation fisherman from Maine. He started making an oyster company, realizing oysters are really great for ecosystems. They clean water. They're a healthy source of protein. So he created all these robots to essentially farm oysters out in the open ocean at 1/10 of the cost. But they put a team together of these really badass oceanographers and ocean scientists. And what they're doing now is just growing kelp in the open ocean, and then sinking it to the bottom of the ocean. So the reason they do that is because they'll sequester carbon. So they get this little biodegradable buoy, they put it out in the open ocean. It will grow kelp super long, sequester carbon as kelp. When it gets big enough, the buoy releases, the kelp sinks to the bottom of the ocean and will never come up again because of the pressure. That's essentially taking carbon and just storing it at the bottom of the ocean floor rather than in the atmosphere.
Dude, all of these things, when I always, we share some of these wild ideas with Nate, they sound like experiments, right? The experiments on the earth and what might help. And I'm always curious what that mass experimentation on the planet could result in outside of, the controls, right? What would it mean if there were a bunch of, juiced up kelp buoys at the bottom of the ocean, right? What are these things? And I guess my mind goes to what are the negatives of this? But what I'm curious is how you see some of these experiments affecting this what you're saying, sensitive ecosystem that has other influences as well.
So the thing to remember is that human society has been running one big experiment on planet Earth just by existing. So I think the clearest example of what you're getting at is a concept called geoengineering, meaning engineering of the Earth. And the real definition is a deliberate intervention in the Earth's climate system on a planetary scale. And so an example of this is this idea that, particularly it's called solar geoengineering. So as I explained before, climate is changing because we have more greenhouse gas, and greenhouse gas traps heat in the atmosphere and warms the planet. And the reason it traps heat is because the light comes in, but it doesn't come out. And so people looked at volcanoes, because when volcanoes erupt, they spew all these emissions into the atmosphere, specifically sulfur. And when they spew this cloud of sulfates into the air, it actually makes the Earth's atmosphere more reflective. So the sun comes in and bounces off the cloud of sulfates and goes back in the atmosphere. And so the result is that there's less sun coming in and there's less heat. And so people look at that and see there's been volcanic eruptions that have been big enough to cool the Earth temporarily for 1 degree Celsius. which is huge.
Oh, damn.
Considering that like
Yeah.
we're trying to keep like catastrophic climate change is like 2 degrees and up. That's huge. That's just one volcano. And so people look at that and say, we can just design similar particles, similar aerosols, like spray them in the super high atmosphere, the stratosphere, and reflect sunlight so that there's not as much heating the planet. And it's like they call it like almost like chemo. It's like a temporary fix, basically. It's like just a way of keeping things a little cooler and buying us more time to adapt. Like it doesn't solve the underlying problem of there being more greenhouse gases, but it could potentially cool the atmosphere and buy us a little more time so that the rate of change is slowed. And so it's super controversial because it's just one big experiment, and we don't know what all the bad shit that could happen, unforeseen consequences as a result. And so it's very controversial for that reason. People who support like understanding and researching it say, well, yeah, but we don't really have a choice. Like we better to know it. And we've already been running this big experiment this whole time. I could do things like the crazy thing about this is like all it takes is one country to do it. So like if India, for example, just suffered heat wave after heat wave and had millions of people die because of it, they might say we have to if we can, we have to deploy this. Like we can't have our people die. And so they could do it unilaterally. They can take it upon themselves to do this. And we don't know what the impact would be on the rest of the country. Like it would impact parts of the world differently because the climate system is complex. And say it makes their monsoon season stronger, they get more rain. What if in doing so it makes the monsoons for China less strong? Like China has billions of people that's going to impact. So some crazy shit happening, basically. And the overarching theme is like there's a lot of unknowns, and like sometimes doing something with unforeseen consequences sometimes is better than doing nothing at all.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just smiling because I'm
Not
just thinking.
always.
Yeah, I'm thinking about you going to the pyramids. how it's the same metaphor. Sorry, but yeah, what I hear of that too, and I think you've shared with me about it, is the ensuing politics around this, right? Like the global politics around this. If India were to do it, how would China's response politically, right? Like on
both nuclear states.
Jeez, dude. Well, do you mind now that, because I've just peeked over to the chat and it seems like there's a few some questions. Do you mind answering one or two?
Yeah, go for it.
So what I see here, that Sheet J asked, is the single biggest contributor carbon emission actually cows?
No, not the single biggest, but they're pretty big. The biggest is power, like the way we produce electricity and energy. But agriculture is, I think that globally, I think agriculture is the second, and a big part of it is cows. The story is that cows spend all day eating grass, and grass is like pretty hard to digest, and so they have 4 stomachs to digest it. And the process in which they break down that grass in their stomachs, they produce their gut microbes, the microbes for their digestion, produce methane, and so they burp a lot. I mean, when humans fart too, we're also producing methane. It's just cows like are burping all day, and they're big, and there's a lot of cows, and so they burp a lot of methane and fart it, but mainly burp it. And they burp a lot of methane into the air, and methane is a greenhouse gas that's very potent. It's like short-lived, but it's very good at trapping heat. So when you have a lot of cows and they're burping a lot
of burps.
Yeah.
So cow burps over farts is a danger?
Mostly burps, yeah.
Okay.
So for context, we have an investment in a company that found out if you just feed cows this combination of like garlic and citrus, it makes them burp less. It helps them digest, and so it makes them burp less. So you cut their burps like 20-30%, which is pretty good for all you're doing is feeding them garlic and citrus.
The fact that someone's figuring this out too. Dope, dude. Dope.
Yeah.
I think this is a good place to maybe, leave off in this conversation. Oh yeah, actually got a question here from one of the mods, Nico asking, or the just asking, what your opinion is on the Green New Deal. And by the way, I don't know if you know, AOC is going to be in Astoria Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that today?
That's today. So if you mind, if you don't mind answering that, first just give some context into what is the Green New Deal, and then maybe your opinion on it.
Yeah. So no one really knows, to be honest. It's just kind of like this big idea. It's not even an actual like policy. It's like like a an umbrella of various policy proposals. None of them that have actually been enacted or even like there's not even bills really. But the basic idea is like we need to restructure our economy so that it's not contributing to climate change, but also that it's cleaner. It just makes more sense for it's healthier for humans, for us, like it's for public health. But that in doing so, in transforming our economy towards a cleaner and greener and more sustainable way of living and being and producing, there's a lot to be gained in terms of jobs and economic opportunities. And so that's the base, the crux of the Green New Deal is like, there's an opportunity to transform the way we do things, the way we live and eat and move. And that transformation is not like a burden. It's not a cost. It's an opportunity. And so, I mean, obviously there's costs to be paid, but think of it like an investment. Like you always hear the people that oppose the Green New Deal talk about how expensive it will be, but what they're ignoring is all the benefits we'll have, how many costs we avoid from climate change, all the benefits and income we'll have from making that change. Like, well, there's a lot of good to be reaped from making that investment. So I think the Green New Deal is great. We'll see what actual policies come of it, but that's the basic idea. And I spend every day working towards that same goal. So yeah, obviously a fan.
Taking those actions that, we're talking about this whole time, right? Actions, despite, investing in these things, maybe despite any sure.
I mean, just like even if climate change wasn't a thing, I think it just makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be living in a city in which there's endless cars spewing gases that are detrimental to our health when we have cars that are just as cheap and entirely clean.
Yeah. But that's expensive, dude. All this stuff costs money.
So yes, but you have to think of the long term. So it's more expensive up front. The longer term, you're saving a lot of costs down the road with the environmental damages you pay, the public health damages you pay, the lives lost to air pollution. And honestly, just it's actually, in fact, from a more practical sense, like owning an electric car, you pay more upfront, but like because electricity is cheaper than gas, it saves you money. So and I use that example just to prove a point that it's like you have to take a longer term, a broader perspective on these things, because it's like there's costs to be paid undoubtedly, and there will be costs to be paid in the Green New Deal. But longer term, it's actually going to save us money and actually going to cost us less and earn us more.
How willing do you think people are going to be to this change? How willing are they? I mean, it's already happening, right?
Yeah, I think generally
they give up their comforts that they're already used to.
It depends who you are, really. I think, and one of our central theses as a fund is that, like, oftentimes these solutions just make sense even in a world without climate change. So like, regardless of what you think about, if you're a hippy dippy or if you're a coal miner, it just makes more sense if the energy you're paying for is cheaper. Like it's going to win regardless if it's clean or not. If it's cheaper, it's going to win. And often clean just is better. It's better, it's faster, it's cheaper, stronger. Think about like a Tesla. Tesla's like the most valuable car company in the world right now for reasons. crazy reasons in the stock market and all that. But like people buying Teslas aren't doing it just because it's cleaner. They're doing because they want a cool fucking car that goes fast and is a nice driving experience, and it's saving the money on gas. And so when you build solutions like that, I think people are very willing.
Very dope. Well, dude, before we sign off, I'm curious if there are any, books we should be reading, podcasts that you recommend people to follow. Just what are your recommendations to stay informed on this stuff?
On climate, actually, Bill Gates wrote a really good, it's super dry, but if you're committed to kind of learning about all the causes and all the drivers and all the solutions, he wrote a book recently called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster that does a really, really good job at explaining it all in very simple terms, like the way he breaks it down. And it's super digestible. It's a little dry, but it's great. The podcast that I found my job on, My Climate Journey, is also a really great podcast because it's like the premise is that the guy came to it knowing very little about climate and just started learning through interviewing people. And so you can learn in the same way that he learns by speaking to the smartest people on the topic. Yeah, those are my two main suggestions.
So the book was what I remember is the podcast
Disaster by Bill Gates, and the podcast series is My Climate Journey.
My Climate Journey. And you can find that anywhere you find podcasts. What's Spotify, Apple?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, great, man. Is there anything that you want to plug? Is there anything you want to share now that you got a few 15 people? Probably our friends and family, and some of my friends. Anything that you want to use this platform to
share LaplazaLive.
Nice.
Let's get the word out.
Cool. Thank you, dude.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, man. And like I said earlier, having you on as my first guest was intentional, right? Like I was thinking for a while of what I was going to do and what I was going to say and what it was going to look like. But what I was very sure of is that I wanted you to be my first one, because just was so impressed and proud of the things that you're working on right now. Even just through this conversation, the fact that you could explain so clearly all of the complex systems that are affecting us and your place in it all. And I wanted to know a little bit more about that and about you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, man. I'm honored to be the first guest.
Cool.
It means a lot to me.